the free one.
Yeah.
We are live. Hello there to everybody watching. Welcome. This is Guy. To those of you who are not familiar with Guy, don't you quickly want to do a brief introduction?
Right, so my name is Guy, in case you missed that, and I run several YouTube channels. One is called How to Be a Great GM, the other one is called Off My Bridge, which is a Star Trek focused one, and then Guided Adventures, which is a history-inspiring D&D one. So I do that, and then I write books. I write lots of books on how to run role-playing games and how to tell stories in them, and that's pretty much me.
Yep. And Laura, hi.
Oh, hello, Laura. Rawr.
Rawr. So, Guy and I are old friends, going back to South Africa and the role-playing scene in South Africa, which is not a very big scene, I will be honest. Like, most of us knew each other. And we learned to know each other through role-playing and LARPing and all of that kind of thing. So I asked Guy to come on here and talk about how to world build for D&D. Okay, so this is a focus around world building. Really it applies to any role-playing system, but we're talking D&D specifically, where you have the limitations of a magic system and game balance and all of those kinds of details that you have to work around in terms of your world building. So the first question that I want to ask is the big one. How do you work around the magic when you want to do a kind of wondrous effect?
Right. It's an excellent question because it's been getting more and more difficult over the different iterations of D&D. And I think the very first thing to realize is that back in the day, right, when you and I were still running around a field trying to kill goblins and all that kind of cool stuff, there were several D&D worlds, but it wasn't a given that you were going to be playing in them. That was dependent on if you had the book and the setting book and that sort of thing. Whereas modern D&D, even to the 2024 edition, has become much more about their settings. And so your own homebrew setting kind of gets pushed aside because it's so integrated now into the magic, into the characters, the way that the players are allowed to make their characters, and that sort of thing. So when you start to tweak stuff or change stuff, it has a ripple effect across the whole game, which it should have, because if your world is different, your world should be different. But from a creation process, you have so much more that you now have to take into consideration. You can't just say, oh, I'm changing the name of the gods, because all the priests draw their power from specific gods who have specific control over certain aspects. And they're going to be saying to you, well, hey, which god is in charge of the law domain? So you have to take into account a lot of mechanical stuff in your world creation, which when it comes to magic, you're like, well, I want to create a ritual that's going to rip the world in half. And you go, okay, well, technically you go to level 9 spells and then you run out of level 9 spells, and Wish is one of them, but even Wish has been reduced down in terms of its power in the latest version. So what do you then do? And one of the mechanical ways of getting around it is that it's ancient magic or it's lost magic or something along those lines. What I always do is in my games, I have 3 additional types of magic, which I let my players know beforehand. Hey, these are 3 different avenues of magic that you can add in. You have access to them. They don't change the mechanics. They add mechanics. And those, the one is now my brain has gone dead. Collective casting. So I want to have 10 mages that gather around and they're all chanting, as you know, the traditional cult who are all chanting to create a single giant portal to another world and that sort of thing. So collective magic, what happens is if you have 3 creators or casters, or if you have 5, or if you have 15, the power increases, the effect increases, the radius increases exponentially. So that's how I do it, is that I look at what is there and then I say, right, what do I need it to do, or what do I need, and how do I then add it in without breaking anything or changing anything. But you have to make sure that you are going back and seeing what already exists there.
I think one of the things that I like to do, and the thing that I actually recommend in world building blueprints, which you should all go back on Kickstarter. It's got still open for late pledges. So what I recommend there as well is like use items that cannot be recreated. Like an item that was made by a god, made in a forgotten age, traveled here from the future, spawned randomly out of a crystal.
Yes.
It doesn't matter. As long as the players have no hope of ever reproducing this thing, you're fine.
Yes. But so, for example, I was using your book. I did 3 episodes on my Guided Adventures channel where I was using just chapter 2 of your book to create one little region of territory. Now, this region of territory is called Drakkenmoor, and I'm going to be running a couple of games in Drakkenmoor at the in November. And I have had Drakkenmoor now for 15 years of role playing. I have had countless players go to Drakkenmoor and do all kinds of stuff. Right? It's a vampire-controlled territory. It's perpetually covered in fog. The fog is created by these ancient artifacts, as you have suggested. How do they work? It's magic. They're ancient. If the players want to investigate how they can break them, sure, that's absolutely fine. We're going to do that. But in your chapter 2, you were talking about how has the flora, how has the foliage been affected, right, by this world state, by this, in my case, perpetual fog and vampires and all that kind of stuff. And you ask, and how does this work within the magic system of your world? And so you sit back and you go, well, Dungeons and Dragons doesn't really deal too much with environmental effects. It's very, very hands off. Right? Magic underwater, it just kind of works, right? We don't want to get too complicated. We don't want to work out stuff. So in fog, does it just work? Does it not just, how does this work? But it forced me to sit back and go, actually, you know what? This does need to change. So let me go research quickly what plants like to grow in sort of dense fog or in very moist conditions. How do they survive? What are their coping mechanisms? And then to look at it and go, okay, so these are some of the things that I can add in from real world inspiration, but now I twist them up to make them a little bit more sinister. And so suddenly I have these very fern-like things. Ferns love lots of moisture, right? But the ferns themselves, they secrete like this sticky substance. Because then I was reading about fungi who also like to grow in low light. And fungi have an external digestive system. A lot of fungus secrete enzymes around their roots, which will digest things outside of their bodies. It literally dissolves it down into the soil, and then the fungus can absorb it, right? So it's like, these things, this is perfect. So this mist fern now has an external digestive system. These giant ferns everywhere. And it's new. It's something that I haven't ever thought of before. But your template was like, well, you need to think about it now. And I did. And wow, so cool to just have these little throwaway things. It's like, you want to go for a camp? Sure. Set your camp up in the middle of these ferns and watch as you dissolve overnight. Anyway, sorry, just an observation.
No, I mean, that's why I built the book. It's why, like, it is not necessarily that you're supposed to use everything in the book. And in fact, I don't recommend it. You'll be world building for a very long time. It's supposed to be a dip in, dip out. Like, I need a politics system. Let me go look at the politics system. I need an economic system. Let me go look at economics. So let's stop quickly for some hellos. Hello to A. Wellyard. Good to see you. Secondhand says looking forward to the books. Me too. The
There's Sid Morrison.
There's Sid Morrison. Okay. Said, will there be a question section? Oh, this Sid Morrison. I got you. Yes, there will absolutely be a question section. We'll stop after each kind of question to, answer whatever you're asking.
Questions are great.
Questions are amazing. So that was kind of working with magic and wondrous effects. Now I have a bugbear with the D&D magic system, and that lies in healing. Okay. And this is my eternal one, which I always like. I either hand wave or I make my world's utopia because I'm like, this doesn't work.
Yes.
So any level 1 priest basically can cure diseases, wounds, etc. So people aren't dying from childbirth,
right?
If they can get to a temple, right? Because I mean, most of childbirth deaths were caused by like blood loss and stuff like that because of the baby coming out wrong, etc.
100%, yeah.
People aren't necessarily dying from. I think you have to be level 6 for disease, although that might only be magical disease. But yeah, but I mean, but they're not dying from getting their wounds infected. They're not, like there's all of these diseases that just aren't there. Even water. I mean, I think it's level 1 for purify water, or it was last time I played. Like, okay. So given that you're not having these population knock-ons, like, why isn't the health in D&D completely different from what it was in the quote-unquote Middle Ages?
For sure. Absolutely. And this is one of those regions where I used to get frustrated and go, you're absolutely right. No one can die. Why would you form an assassin's guild? Because you can just resurrect the king that's been assassinated, right? Death has no meaning because you can just be brought back with enough cash. But that's where I think it then lies. So, for example, with the idea of healing and childbirth and your population literally not dying off, turn to our own world. We have all of that stuff, and yet 3/4 of the planet don't have all of that stuff, and women still die in childbirth. It's a financial thing. And so when I look at it, you go, all right, the party has got 2 clerics, a druid, and a paladin who can all do healing. That seems like healing is then a very common thing across the planet. It depends on how you're playing your campaign. If your campaign is high magic, then yes, it is a common thing all over the planet. But then you have to ask yourself, where is the economy? Where is the money? And it's always about the money. So suddenly you go, sure, anyone can become a priest. Absolutely, you can become a priest. All right. But what are the requirements to become a priest? And that step from being a level 0 character where you have no skill, you don't have the ability to cast healing magic and that sort of thing. So these would be your average peasants. What gets them to being a level 1 character? Well, that's going off and that's doing an adventure, gaining some kind of experience by taking initiative. So the barrier to entry, I feel, is financial. It's like, well, if you can pay for that kind of education, or if you can pay, because how else is the church going to maintain power, right? It becomes problematic because they literally can actually manifest their deity. So the church doesn't need belief. It doesn't need faith. It needs weekly demonstrations, which it can do. Oh, you're bleeding to death. Oh, you have sepsis from an open wound. Oh, you have this. Sure, you have to pledge yourself to our God because everybody else's gods can help you, but you have to pledge to ours. So I kind of feel like it becomes an area for either mass cash exploitation, so it's just too expensive for the average person to afford, or it becomes well, you have to basically pledge yourself to our God for forever, And then it becomes, well, we can't treat you because you worship another god, and that temple doesn't exist in this village.
You're outside of your hospital network.
Yes, literally, you are outside of your hospital network, so we can treat you, but the price is 10 times as much. So you've got to, especially in Dungeons and Dragons, there is a certain amount of dismissiveness that you have to allow for, because the system wasn't built with any kind of authenticity behind it. And so, yeah, from my perspective, with regards to the healing, my games, the priests and the healers and that sort of thing, it is a much rarer thing than common. And as a result, there is that. At the same time, though, the healing still needs to be able to keep up with the amount of death. Yes. And so when you look at a medieval sort of period, you go, all right, during the medieval ages, yes, we had war, we had famine, we had plague, we had deprivation, we had starvation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that was only from other humans. Now factor in that there are giant wyverns that can take entire half a village, or at least a fully grown man. There are so many more potential ways of dying that although we have a medieval village, we almost have to think about it as it's a medieval village, but the actual real world simile would be an Amazonian tribe or an African tribe where their numbers are kept in check because life is so freaking dangerous that you would need to have a priest per person to be able to keep up with the snake bites, the lions, the tigers, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, that's kind of my thinking.
So I actually have never, I've thought of the economic angle, and I'll tell you in a moment what my problem is with that. But sure. I grant you, I haven't actually factored in like the actual world danger and so on. I'll tell you what my problem with the economic problem is. D&D's economics is so bad. It is so bad. And it ties back to the way, now I haven't played D&D 5th edition yet, I will admit. So it's been a while, right?
They haven't fixed the economics in 5th edition.
Yeah. But the problem is that they tied the economics into the game balance. So what happens is your party needs a certain amount of money in order to have the correct threat level as a party, in order to go up against their level appropriate monsters, in order to all of it ties together. That means that if you have a party that's level 10, they need to earn so much money, they are Elon Musk to everybody else in your world. Either that or everybody else in your world is incredibly rich. Like it just doesn't logically come together.
It really doesn't. And I wish I could defend it, but I can't, because in 2019, I put together a book called The Complete Guide to Nautical Campaigns. And that book was meant to just be how to play pirates in D&D, because it is a quest that I had been on since I was a teenager. I wanted to do sailing ships and orcs and elves and fighting ships and all that kind of stuff. So when I finally got to writing the book, it was meant to just be a little supplement, 10 pages at best, right? But then we started to go, yes, but what about this? Oh, but what about that? Oh, but what about this? And then you get to cargo capacity for ships. Now, D&D since 2nd edition, so 30 years ago, has always had the price for a ship, a small little cog or a little kind of medieval sailing ship. And you go, okay, what is the cargo capacity of that ship? Oh, it's 2 tons, it's 5 tons, it's 6 tons, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then you look at the actual numbers that they've got for a pound of flour or a pound of this, and then you translate that into 1,000 of them to get to 1 ton. And you realize that, yes, their economics has no grounding in any kind of reality at all. 5th edition and 2024 edition has doubled the number of magical items that your characters should have at a given level. I mean, you and I are old school, and I run 5th edition supposedly. I use a lot of 3.5 rules just because I'm old and that sort of thing. But when I read the magic items for 5.24, the 24th edition, I'm like, how many? What?
See,
And
this,
what they did,
yeah.
which was very frustrating, was that they removed the price tag from these magical items because they realized, wait a second, the price tag breaks the economy. But what that did was it broke the economy even more, because then you don't have a relative value. So then you have this problem of the players going, okay, is there a magic shop? Because I want to sell this magical dagger. And you go, okay, sure, there is a magic shop there. You want to sell this magical dagger. That's 2,500 gold pieces. The average peasant or the average sailor is earning 30 gold pieces a month. Okay, so 360 gold a year, and you're selling this for 2,500 gold pieces. The store owner needs to be a millionaire in order to be able to buy stuff to sell stuff. And anybody who owns a ship is also going to just make money hand over fist. So I know why they did it. They didn't need it in the beginning.
Yeah.
Right.
And also the problem is, so if you do all of that, right?
Yeah.
So your risk reward ratio for being an adventurer goes through the roof in terms of your reward, your return on investment. Make sure you have a priest, start small, and you're pretty much guaranteed to come back with bazillions.
Yes. You will literally make more selling just the chainmail that the one goblin was wearing than if you spend 30 days plowing a field.
Yeah. And that it cannot work like that. Your economy. Okay. So I know that. I know. I take deep breaths and I let I let D&D's economy go. There are very few role-playing systems that do the economy well.
Sure.
Very, very few.
You can understand why, because it does become difficult to track and make it so that it's fun to play.
Yes.
But at the same time that you then don't break the whole system. And what a lot of systems do is they give you a wealth rating.
Yes.
Like, oh, you have a wealth rating of 3, so you can buy everything that the common person can buy. Yeah. And you go, okay, well, that seems on the surface to solve that problem then. Except that when you go and get magical stuff or cool stuff, you're like, well, does my wealth rating suddenly jump to wealth rating of 5, in which case I can buy myself a private army because of this magical item, or how does it work? And they just ignore it. They don't try and balance it out. Then
the best application I've seen of that wealth rating is Rogue Trader from the Fantasy Flight. From Warhammer. Because sure, your wealth rating can go up, but it doesn't go up because you've sold a specific item or whatever. You own a 5-mile big ship, you know? It's not going to go up because you found a single artifact. It goes up when you've completed X missions and you do X rolls and blah, 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 and then your wealth rating goes up. It's the only time I've seen it implemented well. The rest of the time, it tends to be really bad.
Yes, exactly. But there is another factor that has to be taken into account when you are doing this kind of world building for a game. And that is, forget the world. This is weird. Forget the actual world and the actual people in that world. The human player likes to be rewarded for doing stuff.
Yes.
And so that whole idea of, here's some shiny stuff for your character, Literally, there's an entire computer game industry based on microtransactions because you want to buy a different colored dice, right? As opposed to the same dice, which does the same thing, but you want the one that's got the pink swirls in it. Or you want your character to have bunny ears instead of regular ears. So you'll pay an extra $2 for that, right? So the satisfaction of the player is also something that has to come into account. And I have had the experience where I have said to my players, okay, this is a gritty world and you're going to really struggle to make money and you're going to have to sing for your supper and that sort of thing. And although it was initially cool that the bard would go and sing in a tavern and would earn maybe 7 copper, which would be enough to buy a plain meal for them only, after a couple of sessions, the players were like, I'm kind of bored of being poor because this feels too much like real life. I want to sleep in a nice bed for once. I want to take a coach instead of having to walk. And you're going, well, you know what? We are just playing a game. So as much as I certainly don't think that it's impossible to create a viable gaming system that is simulationist in terms of a working economy, working health system, et cetera, I just would always caveat by saying, but is it going to be fun to play in?
And I think that's a great rule to keep in mind with D&D. And it's why, like, I will bitch and nitpick till the cows come home when I'm given the opportunity to be like, but this doesn't, and this doesn't, and this doesn't. But when I'm actually running the game, I'm just like, it's okay. We just hand wave away the fact that all of this doesn't work and run a world the players will enjoy, because really that's what it's about. Yeah. Although I will say, like Faerun, the Forgotten Realms, I'm like, man, that economy's weird.
Well, that's an interesting example because when they were creating Baldur's Gate, the computer game, they suddenly have to take into account economy because your player's getting cash, right? What they don't have to take into account is the free will of the player. So I know that when they were doing Baldur's Gate 3, a big focus was on, well, hang on a moment, we've got to make it work that you can sell magical items and buy magical items, and you're not going to bankrupt yourself or bankrupt an entire village just to get a new this or a new that. What they didn't have to take into account, and this is where they were lucky, is that, the players have got 20 or 30 or 40,000 gold pieces. They could go and buy a little castle or a little estate or the players have only got 40,000. They couldn't even buy the front door of a castle.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas, again, you kind of go back to D&D and something that you may not know is that they've added in a thing called bastions, which is basically the idea that as a player character, you get to level 5, hey, you get a bastion. And that's a one-room little townhouse somewhere. And that's your little safe haven. And then you can spend money increasing it and upgrading it, and it gives you certain abilities and things. And it's a lovely idea. And what they did with some of the mechanics, I thought was really smart. What they did with some of the other mechanics was not so smart. And the economy that I think they got wrong was the economy of time. Because when you think about role-playing groups and they go off on their adventure, most adventures are happening in a couple of days. Occasionally you'll say, well, you're at sea for a week. Okay, great. A week passes. But I very seldom have run games where it's, okay, you take a break from adventuring for 3 months. It's usually just always go, right? Yeah. So within the new 5th edition, they now have a monthly cycle for these bastions. And you're like, but the players aren't keeping track of months. I do remember playing 2nd edition in 1990, where the GM was like, you have to have a calendar and you have to keep track of the days because you have to keep track of the food that you've got. Otherwise, you're going to start starving. But that was because the GM was being a simulationist and wanted that in the game. But that doesn't happen very often anymore. It's very sort of hand wavy. So that was an example of them adding in another economy, but without actually thinking about how it's going to work. Just that this is a cool way of managing it. You go, it's a cool way, but it doesn't work within your space. So for me, that is permission going, hey, the game designers are adding in stuff because it's cool and it may not necessarily work. So you as the DM have to then be given the same latitude. Don't punish yourself by going, oh, no, I've got to make it work. No, you don't. The big guys don't. That's all I'm saying.
So let's take a look and see if there's any big questions in here. There's a lot of very funny comments. Those spell plagues are the worst. Yes, they are. And then we've got spell components. The thing about spell components, so Laura mentions that there's spell components. The thing about spell components, they only matter at level 1 and 2. After that, you've got so much money, like spell components are just hand wave,
that and also this is just old school me lamenting. You can now just buy a spell pouch and it has all of the basic components that you would need that don't cost a certain amount. And you're like, so why do you still have them in the game? If it's a non-entity, remove it. It's like arrow count, right? Some players will keep track of arrows.
Sure.
But you know what? Sometimes you forget that you fired 3 arrows this round, and so I think it's a balance, and the components as a magic system anyway. You're like, okay, so does that mean that, let's say, for example, you need some spider web, right? Spider web does not last. It's very strong, but it doesn't last. It decomposes very, very, very quickly. It breaks down super quickly. How the hell are you storing that? And what happens if you just happen to be in an area that doesn't have a lot of spiders? Say the Arctic. Not a lot of spider webs running around. So does that just mean that Arctic people never cast that spell?
We do have spiders up here, by the way, a lot.
Okay, but you're not true Arctic, right? I mean,
I'm 1,000 kilometers below the circle. I can drive to
1,000 kilometers. Do you know how many adventures happen between you and the Arctic?
I've been in the Arctic Circle as well, and there were spiders. The arachnophobe within me. You'll struggle with snakes.
Good.
But you will find spiders.
Yes. Okay, I stand corrected. But you see, again, there we go. I have now learned something.
But the problem with the spell components are amazing for flavor. Right? I don't know if you've ever read the Harry Dresden books, but when he makes potions, like he puts ingredients into them, like he's making a love potion, and his spell mentor says to him, you need to grind up a diamond, and he's like, dude, I don't have a diamond. He's like, well, then we'll take a $50 bill and cut it up. He's like, it'll make the potion a bit sleazy, but at least it'll have some.
That's lovely. That is lovely. Another magic system which handled spell components, I thought fairly well, was Magic the Gathering. And when Magic the Gathering first came out, the whole concept of Magic the Gathering, if you've never played it, is that you, as the spellcaster, control lands around the world, and you draw power from those lands. Now, when they started to release the novels, they needed to work out how would that actually work. It's not like these wizards are walking around with attractive swamp behind them. How does it work? And so they had these little packages, these little parcels that contained a piece of the land in them, which they would then keep in their satchel. And so if you could steal the mage's satchel away, he couldn't actually touch the land that he was drawing his power from. And so then he couldn't cast any magic. So the satchel was really, really key and really important. But it was also visually a nice way of representing, oh, I do have this land. I can draw energy from this land. This is really cool. And I thought that was quite nice. So, yeah.
So the Sid Morrison says, as an amateur writer, I think that without strict boundaries, one can't create a consistent world, lore, or even storyline, especially in a fantasy genre. So I want to say yes and no. So it depends on what you mean by strict boundaries. Tolkien created a very, very consistent world with a very soft magic system. You can tell me absolutely nothing about how Lord of the Rings' magic system works. It just does. It does stuff, you know. Like, why does the ring turn people invisible? Who knows? And it doesn't matter per se. And still the world is incredibly consistent internally because he put a lot of effort into his cultures, primarily through his languages, but he put a lot of effort into his cultures and into his politics and so on. Martin has got a soft magic system as well, which is theoretically fairly limitless. You know, if you think of like that woman who whelped the shadow assassin and stuff like that, there's definitive clear magic. But it's still like a internally consistent world. So you can go bananas, but you can make it or think about like Sanderson's world, the storm world. It's got these ever storms that rage around the world that spawn lightning, and he's got a hard magic system. Again, a very internally consistent world. You can make a world that is internally consistent, even if you break all the laws of physics. But the world has to maintain its own mythic logic. You, the world builder, you have to understand what you are doing here, in my opinion. So.
I agree. I do. I personally like to have constraints or restrictions, because then it forces you to think, how would that actually apply? How would that be effective? So yes, as you say, Tolkien, yes, there's magic happens, and some people, specific people, have got it and seem to have always had it, and they change color when they get more or less, or we're not entirely sure. It's kind of like a whole Pokemon thing, right? The next evolution. There we go. I can't believe I literally just turned Gandalf into a Pokemon. Anyway, you know, so when you look at that, you go, okay, great. But magic really wasn't the crux of that story.
No.
They weren't fighting magic with magic. It was people with people. And that I think is the bottom line there. So it wasn't necessarily required to be hugely robust, whereas the people needed to be robust. The relationships needed to be robust. So focusing on where do you need to build your restrictions? Where do you need to build your constraints? I think that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think, like, I have read all of Glenn Cook's books about the Black Company. That man has got the laziest world building you've ever seen in your whole life. It is everywhere. Okay. Maybe the wizards kind of use a D&D kind of spell system. You don't know. People just spawn fireballs. You don't know why the lady is an immortal. You don't really know why she loses it. You don't know why the tomb opens. But none of that matters, because he writes military fiction, and he was a veteran from the Vietnam War, and he drew the characters, and they're all grunt characters. It's written from the perspective of grunts in a mercenary army, the Black Company. And the characters are so real. The relationships are so real that the world is it's background. It's just background. It doesn't matter. I don't care. I'm not there for the world. I'm there for the characters and the military fiction. So if you really do your characters superbly, you can overcome. You can overcome all kinds of world building.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think a lot of folk get lost in world building, trying to solve everything, and you go, but why? You're never going to need it.
Yeah.
So instead of
Build
doing it, you're just building around it, you know?
build what you need when you need it, not before. Yeah. Okay. So, economics, let's move on to politics, because this requires a little bit of preface. I was doing a lot of research into feudalism recently because I was doing a video on magic feudalism. And it got me really into like the theory of feudalism. Why did feudalism happen? Not the mechanics of it, but why did it happen? And basically it happens because you have a crazy environment, yeah, and then you have people who have enormous actual personal power. They're trained warriors, they have armor, they have a sword, all of those things are expensive, and they personally bring order, and hence people, conglomerate to them, swear fealty, and the whole little pyramid scheme begins, because that's what feudalism is. It's a pyramid scheme. So this got me thinking about D&D and the fact that you have wizards. And I was like, ultimately, it feels like every single government in D&D should be a mage-based feudalist system. Almost without fail.
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely. Mage-based or priest-based. It depends on who gets to use their spells first.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right. And it goes even deeper than that, because you go, well, we've got a spell called Zone of Truth. So our leaders just have to stand inside that zone of truth when they're being made king. Do you swear to protect the kingdom? Yes, I do. Are they telling the truth spell? Yes, they are. Okay, great. You're voted in, or not. So yes, I mean, when it comes to politics and magic, we've seen the full gamut of options. Mages and priests are segregated by the non-magic users because they're evil, or they're distrusted because of their manipulative powers, or every kingdom has a mage school desperately trying to produce the next mage, and it's an arms race of, our mages can detect your mages, and our priests can protect against your priests. And that, I think, is where politics would normally be, as we've seen oftentimes this arms race happens. The question with politics gets even more complicated there, because you go, oh, but the elves live for 1,000 years and the humans only live for 80. Okay, sure. That means what? How do the elves organize themselves? Is it also an arms race? In which case,
and why are we not all just under the elves? Like,
yes, exactly. Because if you've got 1,000 years to operate in, you are going to develop techniques and methods way beyond anything that a little lifespan of 70 can even hope to develop. And it becomes a wonderful ball of, but how did it break away? Because we don't have to answer the question of why is this inequality not there, right? D&D sort of handles it as there's elves, there's dwarves, there's drow, there's this. Everybody's got magic. Everybody's kind of on the same level, right? So the question is, but why? What happened? And maybe there was this elvish empire that ruled everything. And then there was a rebellion of those horrid little humans who are so independent of each other. And you go, but the elves are literally 400 years old, and that's an average age. You don't think a little 20-year-old is going to lead a rebellion, that they've got more magic than you could possibly have, right? So does that just mean that the elves are slow in terms of their reactionary time? Yeah. Well, in that case, then, why are there any elves left? Because I was attending this summit where the military was presenting how the British military are integrating AI into their whole system, and the main function of AI within a military is to be able to adapt and execute plans faster than the enemy. So if elves take 5 years to make a decision because they've got 1,000 years to live in, anything that's making a decision within 5 years is going to have an advantage because they're going to operate first and faster, right? Sure. Okay, great. So the elves are outmaneuvered. But then why are the elves left around?
Yeah.
Why are they not simply annihilated? And, so there's some interesting questions around the politics. And so then you look at it and you go, okay, so let's look at real world scenarios where there is a redundant system, and yet it still goes on to this day.
Sure.
And my first thought is immediately to the Emperor of Japan. Because the Emperor of Japan has no power except that the power that they have been given by the people who have all of the armies and who could declare themselves emperor, but they don't because of a deal that they made. And this was something that I learned when I was in Japan, was that the emperor saw the rise of the samurai and the rise of the power of the daimyos and the shogun, of these little clan states that had more power than the emperor had.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so the emperor said, tell you what, I won't run the country. I'll be in charge of everybody as the emperor, but you guys can run it. And I won't have an army to threaten you or to control you. I will just let you run this country. But I'm the top. And, if I give an order, you have to follow it. But I won't give you any orders because you're in charge. And they all went, great, we accept. And so there is still an emperor to this day, even though the samurai don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And you're going, but, and a lot of the monarchies that we have to this present day, King Charles is not going to lead the next invasion of France. And I'm sorry, It would be France, because we just have to do it out of tradition. I mean, it's not a real choice. We don't have a choice. We just have to do it. It hasn't been done for a long time. It's about time that it starts, King Charles is not going to do it, but he's still there, right?
Yeah.
So you can almost imagine the human population going, well, we could wipe out the elves, but the elves have promised to help us with lots of knowledge and stuff, so the elves can survive. But then you kind of start having, I don't know, more interesting politics where it's like, well, we've got our elves that we look after. Who are your elves? Oh, you've got dwarves. Oh, you've got this, you've got that. We can talk all night.
It creates some very interesting power dynamics that create some very interesting, like, thematic elements to play with, in terms of, like, these non-human races only survive on the edges because, they've made this uneven deal with humanity.
Yes.
With some nation or whatever.
Correct. There has been something that has been done. And what is, especially when it comes back to Dungeons and Dragons, is there's been a huge shift, even within the 2 editions of 5th edition, where evil species don't really exist anymore. And they said, no, orcs are no longer evil inherently. They're now just orcs. And so the politics of the worlds that they had created now have to be recreated, because now there isn't a good and evil force necessarily, or some that were evil are now good. And you go, okay, so is that just like Star Trek where the Klingons were bad and then they made an alliance? And you go, well, if that's the case, that's great. And in Star Trek, they made films and they had so many episodes that dealt with this transition of from enemy to ally, and then back to enemy, and then back to ally, you know. So it became a narrative reason, right? So it is a dynamic space, and
I actually quite like it that there's no more evil races, because that opens up, like, because orcs could be a normal human competitor, right?
yes,
And you could then set up, like, I'm always reminded of the Napoleonic Wars and things like that. There were 6 grand alliances of Europe against Napoleon. Like, people give the French a lot of crap for their armies, but, like, let's be real, Napoleon had a whole era named after him because he was that successful, you know. And there were literally 6 grand alliances of Europe, and it was only on the 6th one that they managed to end him. And you know, you could have that kind of thing where you're like, okay, we have to bring the orcs in because those guys over there are just going to rule the world if we don't.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. And then you go, oh, well, we brought them in. They helped us save everything. So now we have to keep them, and we can't just exile them or discard them. They're integrated into society, you know. I think something that we tend to do is we look at Dungeons and Dragons or any role-playing system, and we see these errors or we see these jarring things, and our immediate reaction is to go, oh, well, that doesn't make sense. That's silly. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I will maintain to my dying day, yes, that's our initial gut reaction. And a more interesting reaction is to go, no. Explain why it exists like that. Explain why the politics do this. Figure it out. And that's where the creativity comes in, is going, oh, yes, actually, you know what? Let's think about this. And sometimes you need to go, okay, actually, it's because D&D was written by an individual who didn't have access to the internet and was using library books as reference, if at all. Right?
Yeah.
Because it was a war game that became a role-playing game. So there was no need for historical accuracy.
We've had a great comment. There's always good and evil. We're the good guys and they're the evil ones. Yes. This is in fact the correct answer.
This is exactly right. Yes. Yes. Very true.
I read a book once where the character was like, so it's a fight of good versus evil, and the other character was like, you know, that's a tricky one. I prefer simpler lines. Them versus us.
Yes. Probably more accurate answer too.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think that one of the most interesting things about world building in D&D is building within the limits of the system. Like, it is tempting to kind of break out of the system, and occasionally, of course, one does, because, you know, there's things that you want to do that's not quite within the system. But it is interesting to try and keep your world inside that system. It teaches you a certain amount of discipline, I guess.
Yeah. And it gives you a space to be creative in, because you now know what you're trying to be creative around, rather than not having anything at all. You're like, okay, well, now I do need to figure out how do the economics work of this or of that? How does the politics work? How does the magic work? How does it not get inundated? And critically, something that you don't necessarily have to do with a novel, but you do have to do with a game, is you have people who are interacting with this thing. You can't change the rules on your side and then not let them know.
Yes.
Or surprise them with it halfway through. It is something that they must know beforehand. And so that it also gives you a bit of discipline, going, well, yes, you might decide that this is the case, but you actually need to write it out and give it to those players or explain it to those players verbally. You need to make it make sense, not just to yourself, but to somebody else. And not just to somebody else, to multiple other people usually. So, yeah.
And, you know, it's fun. Like, I enjoy D&D. I'm currently running a Cyberpunk red game because that's what my players voted for. And it's fun and I enjoy it. I enjoy running futuristic games as well. But, I have a deep love for D&D that I do keep going back to because it's just fun.
Yes,
the
it's
the
just fun.
worlds of D&D is just fun.
Interesting that you're running Cyberpunk, because you look at Cyberpunk and you go, is it Cyberpunk or is it just 2026? Because a lot of the Cyberpunk stuff, you're like, we stopped doing that 10 years ago because we got better stuff than, what those old systems used to rely on.
Yeah.
So
What I'm enjoying about so what I've done in the Cyberpunk is I've actually set my players up as they own a little bar. And they're currently calling it civics and the protection racket because they have to they have to pay licenses, deal with inspectors, and then they had like people move in on their neighborhood, so now they're running their own protection racket with the other businesses in the street in order to it's the most random game I've ever run, I swear.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. I think that's amazing. I think they can work on the name though, because in Neon, that's quite a lot of neon writing. But oh goodness.
No. But yeah, I mean, so you can do a lot with role playing. You can like it doesn't have to be the adventuring party. You can run a tavern game, run a pirate game, run whatever. Eberron's pirates are always fun because you can give them a skyship.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. And skyships break things too. Horribly so. Horribly so. Yeah.
Yeah. So skyships. I mean, let's briefly just touch on Eberron as like our closing thought. And people throw questions in the comments, and we'll address them as the last thing. But let's briefly just talk about skyships. So Eberron. I found Eberron to be such a novel system when it is a setting when it came out, because it presented a industrialized D&D. A D&D that had gone through the industrial age that suddenly had like, industrial magic and elementals trapped in things, lifting skyships and things like that. And now, how did it hit you when you did Eberron?
Eberron, I mean, I don't know. I suppose I grew up with He-Man and Masters of the Universe, which is one of those things of here's magic and technology, and it's kind of mushed together, and they run parallel with each other. So my encounters with Eberron, I was like, this is super cool. I love this idea. And again though, you it's always about looking at it, going, okay, cool. The challenge that you start getting is, okay, if this is possible, where does it become impossible? Where do we get that? And so I think a lot of people didn't like Eberron for the same reason that a lot of people don't like playing sci-fi games. The possibilities are so grand and so infinite that you don't really have a safe space to be in. So unless you've got a really good knowledge of that setting, it's very intimidating. Very, very intimidating. And so a lot of people kind of go, no, let's just do normal D&D, because I know that elves are elves and dwarves are dwarves, and it's sort of medieval, and I can expect medieval stuff. So I guess that's really where it came from. My experiences, I never got to actually play any games in Eberron as a long-term kind of thing. It was always dipping toes in, going, oh, that's cool, and then sort of stepping back. Yeah.
I've run quite a few games in Eberron, one way or another, because I owned all the books for Eberron. So I ran that game every chance I got a chance. Um, and man, I loved it. It was such a interesting, complicated setting, with interesting, complicated politics and setups and so on. Um, but yeah, I mean, I guess like, it depends on your players a lot. Um,
Absolutely.
so Secondhand says I always saw Eberron as a between the wars game. Mix of
Mm.
the Gilded Age waiting for. So yes, Eberron in fact was the war in Eberron that created the Warforged was based on the First World War,
Mm.
and the devastation of whatever that place was, I think, was supposed to be like gas devastation equivalent.
Mm.
So,
Mm. I
yeah.
mean, when you look at it, you go, as a setting, they created so many things that people were like, that is so cool. We need to just transport that into our regular setting, right? Like the Warforged, for example. I remember when the Warforged entered into regular D&D space, I was like,
Come
oh, I
from.
don't know. It feels a bit weird. It's not really magical, but it's kind of like a thing, but it's not a thing. Is it a goal? But that's just kind of a familiarity pushback until you start looking at it and you go, oh, how would this work? Right. And what I remember is, and this was in my campaign setting of Braxia, I had to do it because I needed to account for this sudden, wait, there's now Warforged,
Yeah.
was that there was an entire city of Warforged. And you go, well, how does that city work? And how does it work for organics, the squishies, the ones who accidentally might just get destroyed, demolished, removed? And that opens up a Pandora's box, which is a wonderful Pandora's box to explore. But you only need to open it when the characters actually arrive there.
Yeah.
Right. I had the same thing. My party went to this island, and I decided that centaurs were a cool idea to put there. And then they go to the centaur village, and you go, what does a centaur village look like? Well, there's no chairs, there's no benches. There's lots of lounging areas. There's lots of matted areas, right? There's lots of the even if you think about like you go, okay, a communal area like a Roman bath for a centaur looks more like a cow dip. So there's a ramp going in and a ramp going out, but that's what centaurs would find normal. So yeah.
Architecture through species. It's an amazing thing to explore.
Yes.
And that takes us to a very interesting question from Necromancer JM, who says, how do I give different species notable traits without falling into monocultures? So actually, Eberron, my goodness, my cat just startled behind me. Eberron actually had a really good answer to that, because they had different elf groups and different half-elf groups, and these guys were at war with each other, and they shared the same species traits, the same everything. But it was a case of like they were in different places. They had been on different sides of various wars in the deep past. You treat like, I mean, think about how like I'm a Finn from via South Africa, and Guy's a South African via England, but the cultures we exist in now are very different, and yet we all kind of share, I guess you meant. So treat them in the same way and think about kind of how and where their cultures divided and built up,
Another easy shorthand, which is I use quite often if my players are wandering around a map and I want to give them a random encounter with something, or I feel like, oh, you know what, this area probably should have some kind of village in it, but who's going to live here? You go, okay, cool. Oh, it's dwarves. Great. But then you look at the geography around the area. So if you've got a map, even if it's a continental scale, and you're like, well, these dwarves, the nearest mountain range is about 600 miles away, and the terrain that they're in is actually fairly barren. It's harsh tundra or whatever, right? Well, you go, okay, so if we think of dwarves as traditional D&D dwarves, where there's a certain Scottish flavoring to them, sure. But take a Scotsman and put him into this rocky wasteland, and I'm thinking now of a South African location, the Karoo, and you go, the accent might stay the same for a couple of 100 years, but that dwarf forgets all about tossing a caber and bagpipes. You can't blow bagpipes in a dry environment. They need to be moist on the inside. So bagpipes fall away because that culture can't use bagpipes. So then the dancing falls away, but it gets replaced because people need to have these unifying activities, that hence culture. What does it get replaced with? What does that change? So you've still got dwarf, but now the cultures are radically different, and that's just from looking at the environment that they're in. And it's so much fun to do. As you were saying, I mean, in Braxia, I've got five or six or seven or eight different types of elves. Some are cannibals, some are a meritocracy that wouldn't eat meat if it was the last thing that was around. Some are sort of Romanesque style. And again, it's basically, well, the cannibals are in an isolated little area of forest that has a gigantic mountain range cutting them off from the rest of the world. And they don't have ocean-going vessels because they have a very paranoid culture, a very small tribal culture. They don't have masses of people to work on big projects. So they are literally like Papua New Guinea, isolated communities that eat each other because it's a good source of protein. As opposed to the other elves who have a slave community and so have grand projects because they've got the luxury to design them and the workforce to build it. Same people, right?
Yeah. So just treat them in the same way as you would humans, and split them up by region and give them their different adaptations to their specific regions. So Ryan says the lightning rail sparks the imagination. Yes, it does. I like the lightning rail. I've run a few train fights on it, and it's just so cool for that. Like having people jump and shoot bows and tunnels, and like a real cowboy feeling. So yeah, we've run out of questions in the chat. And I guess we've been talking about world building for about an hour. It has been awesome to hang out with all of you and talk D&D world building. And we need to do this again.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. But we can talk about stuff for hours, forever on everything.
we could probably like run a live stream and just be like, talk about this crap.
I still, just to end on a fun memory, I still remember we were involved in a LARP together, and our two characters were both elves. My character was poking the bear a lot. Your character had a lot of power, a lot of influence. My character had none of that, but I had a lot of rebellious attitude. And I remember once us going, okay, look, we just need to make a plan here. And we got together in a public restaurant. I can't remember the name of it now, but anyway, I remember we get together. We're busy ordering pizza whilst discussing how do we assassinate the human king? How do we kill the king because he was going to be problematic for the elvish troops or the arrival of the elves? And the waiter came around with eyes because like, how do we kill him? How do we kill him and not get caught? Right. So yeah, good time.
That was a great time. That was always a great time. But I must admit that the session I remember most from Tiana was the rain session.
Oh, everybody remembers the rain session. That rain session, it was amazing.
We arrived on the Friday night, and we had only set up one adventure for that night. There was just one thing that was running that night. And it started to rain. And this is South African rain. It's not like a gentle European drizzle. It rains. And we were like, well, we have one adventure and we're running it. And the players were out there for 5 hours in that rain. The monsters were out there for 5 hours in that rain. Nobody could see anything. Everybody was slipping. It was everywhere.
I have to say that was that event, that particular night, just that night, really, I was one of the NPCs. And I was a guardsman, just protecting the village that the players had to try and retake. And we were told, guardsmen, if you can't see somebody, you can't see them. And even if you see them, but they're obviously trying to hide, these are human beings. These are accountants and doctors and lawyers. They're not super cool scouts like their characters. So give them a little bit of leeway. It was raining so hard, they could have been dressed in neon and I wouldn't have seen them anyway, because my glasses were completely covered in rainwater. Not that my god was being a very good god. I would literally stand under the roof whilst it was raining, count to about, 1,000, and then run to the next roof. If there was something happening out there, I did not give a damn. And then amazingly, the most beautiful thing happened. My god happened to stop by the canteen where another NPC was playing the barkeep person. And they said, would you like a cup of cocoa? It's freezing. It's pitch black. Everybody is soaked through to the skin. Obviously, I want a cup of cocoa. So I get my cup of cocoa. And we decide that my guardsman has the hots for this barkeeper person. And so we started role-playing that every patrol, he would come around to get hot chocolate and cocoa. But then the other guards started to realize. And so the guard system kind of collapsed because we were all gathered at the inn having hot chocolate instead of defending the peripheral. The gate guards who didn't have a patrol, they got stuck in the rain. The rest of us had cocoa with marshmallows. It was lovely.
Oh, we've had a few questions coming. So let me just, because we did chat. Okay, so do you benefit from AI? Not really.
No.
The only thing I use AI for is cleaning up my subtitles. Because it is because YouTube generates them for you,
Yep.
but they're kind of trash YouTube, and it doesn't do the lookups right to the fantasy names. So I used to do that by hand, but it takes like an hour, depending on the length of the video. And if I feed it into ChatGPT, it spits out the corrected spellings. Then I just have to read through it as opposed to fixing it all by hand and looking up the spellings of the weird names.
Yeah,
that's about the only use I have for AI, to be honest with you.
If I'm doing player handouts, because I like to do player handouts during games, and I write a letter from the king to something, the players just need to find the clue that they were meant to meet under the bridge or something. So it's literally, I want that letter to look cool and authentic. So then I'll jump onto AI and say, give me a royal crest, or give me the crest of the Guild of Apothecaries or whatever, right? And then I'll just take that crest and I slap that on top. But that's the extent of it.
And only ever in private games. I don't use generated AI images for anything I ever sell.
If it's commercial, you got to pay.
If it's commercial, then I've paid an artist or done it myself.
Correct.
So I hope that answers your question, Sid. Luke, how do you feel about humanizing different non-human cultures? So we actually did talk about that. I actually think it's great because it opens up a lot of possibilities around creating actual political alliances and having, them versus us discussions and that kind of thing. So
I do think that when you look at that list, you go, okay, orcs, goblins to a degree, they already have a culture, right? That we're sort of aware of, and within the zeitgeist, there is a sort of cultural orcs are kind of hunter-warrior, hunter-gatherer kind of things. But when you look at gnolls, you think of them more animalistic, more like pack animals. And you go, okay, cool. Well, how does the hyena pack actually work?
Yes.
Go Google, go watch some David Attenborough on how hyenas work, and you go, actually, hyenas are remarkably bizarre creatures with a whole bunch of little pack things. Now extrapolate that. Take that to the next step and go, well, does the female gnoll leader have to mate with all of the male warriors to prove her dominance over them before they're allowed to go on a hunt? Or has that now translated into a cultural symbolism where they just have to kneel in front of her and acknowledge her greatness? Or, to then start exploring that. And then kobolds, you go, well, are kobolds cold-blooded or are they warm-blooded? And that's a big question. And you go, well, what's the difference? And you go, well, cold-blooded, they don't look after their young. So there's no social contract. There's no blood relation. Cold-blooded creatures will eat each other. They will eat their own children if they encounter them in the wild. There is no familial bond whatsoever. Whereas warm-blooded, that bond has to be there because you have to suckle your young. You have to provide some kind of nourishment. But then how does that change a society where there is no familial bond, where life has no value?
Who teaches the children? Who
Right.
teaches children anything?
And why would
There
they
has
in
to
the
be
first
some
place?
way of passing information.
Exactly. If a culture is to exist, it needs to have started there. I mean, there was, I forget who the anthropologist was, but there was a question asked, at what point does society start? So where do you go from being an animal to being a society? And this particular anthropologist, I wish I could remember who it was, their response was tending for wounded, because the wounded can't tend for themselves.
Yeah.
And in the animal kingdom would be left to die.
Yeah.
So society starts when suddenly resources are allocated to keeping and tending a wound rather than to just abandoning it. And so with kobolds, you go, well, if you're cold-blooded, why would you care for your young?
Yeah. So, Luke,
It's
I hope that
fascinating.
answers your question. Like, it's interesting. It provides interesting opportunities to world build some fascinating sets of society.
Exactly.
So the Sid Morrison actually asked, do you benefit from AI in topics you're not an expert at? So I really, really hesitate here, because my experience with AI is if you don't know anything about the topic you're asking AI about, you will believe it's hallucinations and you will walk away with incorrect information. You can use AI to search, right? It is good at having a conversation-ish. Not a conversation, but like exploring what you should be Googling for. But you have to like actually go and search and follow links and read for yourself, because the problem with the large language models which we have is that they're basically spicy autocomplete, and so they predict completely wrong, okay, some of the time, and that's the hallucination. So sure, use it to kind of get an idea of what you should be searching for, because it can be hard to know, where you should start searching, but don't depend on it for any information, because it lies like a fish on the ground. So
I think also, Google nowadays, you go, oh, I don't use AI. Well, unfortunately, Google has AI built in, so you're using it whether you want to or not. But that Google AI, you type in, who was the first Roman emperor, right? Google will give you now an AI summary of what it has found in terms of looking at all of the answers. If you just read that and go, okay, cool, fantastic, So it wasn't Caesar, it was Augustus who declared himself emperor, or who was declared emperor, right? And you go, okay, cool. That hasn't given you any useful information, because what does that give you in terms of world building? It doesn't give you anything. What is interesting is to then say, okay, but why was Augustus in the position in the first place? Because he wasn't Caesar's son. He wasn't Julius's son. There was a relationship there, and then, but what were the other people involved? And that rabbit holing is when I find the most useful stuff. So if I go and say, okay, I know nothing about Peruvian politics in 500 AD, right? Okay, cool. Let me start Googling. And AI might say, well, it was chief, et cetera, who was great. Let's Google that chief. Let's Google what happened on that day. Let's Google, and then you start following the trail, and you end up nowhere near Peru. You end up somewhere in Czechoslovakia in 1950 or 60 because of following this thing. But something cool happened then, and you go, well, that's more interesting than Peru. So your curiosity driving your exploration, I think, is way more likely to remember the stuff that you're being given or that you are finding, rather than AI, which just gives it to you. Because then you don't have to remember it, right? Because it's been given to you.
And I actually did some studies recently where students who used AI to research their answers tended not to retain the information.
Yeah.
So if you want to retain the information, read it your own self is kind of the.
and again, though, you go, what is the point, right?
Yep.
If the point is, oh my goodness, I need to create this interesting adventure that may be inspired by some world history thing, right? Yep. And it's a once-off and it's a throwaway. Yep. Well, then sure, use AI. Yep. That's it. On the other hand, if you want to be able to sit back and go, I wonder, those kobolds, maybe, I remember I learned something about X. With AI, you didn't learn anything. Yeah. Now you have a starting point. It might be the wrong starting point, but at least it's a starting point, and you have had that thought to follow it through. So, because I don't want it to appear like AI is evil or bad. It is a particular tool.
Yeah.
But that's all that it must be.
And this is what I always say to people as well. I am not, there are problems with AI. I think there are massive problems with the content compensation model, which is going to have to be addressed because they are going to destroy the open web, because there is no way for content creators to get compensated. So content creators have no incentive to put more content on the web, and that results in, you see what I mean? It's kind of like a cascading thing. Because ad revenue no longer comes into websites because people don't click on them, they just read the Google. So that's one thing that has to be addressed. The environmental concerns are massive. I don't know how to fix them. The amount of power that AI uses and so on, I have no idea how to fix any of that. So I'm aware of them. I'm following politicians who talk about it, and that's kind of what I can do. But in terms of the actual use of the LLM itself, if you know what you're doing, it is a good, I use it in coding to code base scaffolding code in my job. But I am a very, very good coder. So when I tell it, just generate this thing for me, it spits out the code faster than I can, remember how to do this particular thing, because it's in a language or a discipline that I don't use much, like SQL, because I don't write a lot of SQL queries. But I know enough to fix the thing when it spits out incorrect answers and all of that. So I don't say that AI has no place or that LLMs are useless or anything like that. They have their uses. But don't depend on it. It is not a dependable technology.
Correct.
Yeah. So that is my take on AI. And yeah.
And what a subject it is that we talk for half an hour just on that, right?
Okay.
And they're like, no, that wasn't even my question. You guys still got it wrong. It's like,
You know, it's a tricky subject, LLMs. Like, I don't know where this is exactly going. I know where it's not going. It's not going to general intelligence. Like all of those dudes standing up there on those stages, they are lying to people. Like they are 100% lying. Oh, do I use AI for writing? Absolutely not. So I wouldn't advise this for learning about space travel. I would go and learn the physics you need, but honestly, you don't need that much. Hand wave it with magic. You'll be better off.
Or just jump onto a social media platform, find an astronaut, and say, "Hey, you went to space. What was it like?" You know, it was so interesting. There was a talk on the board game Terraforming Mars. And what they did with Terraforming Mars, the board game designers, they'd come up with the mechanics, but they knew nothing about actually terraforming Mars.
Yeah.
And so they reached out to one of NASA's top astronauts who her entire job is thinking about how to terraform Mars. And they said, "Hey, would you give us some information? We're designing a board game." And she gave them a whole bunch of information. What was interesting was that they were asking her questions that she hadn't even thought of and would now add into her planning for NASA, because no one had said, but what if I steal oxygen from somebody else's habitat? Right? What if I do this? What if I do that? What if I, et cetera, et cetera? And she was like, well, we never even thought that would be a thing. But if other humans are thinking, so it is amazing to reach out to experts, and then they're going to give you their cool stuff. Because remember, when you reach out to somebody who has a lot of knowledge about something, they're going to try and give all of it to you at once. So you're going to get bonus content that you didn't even think about, and
honestly,
it might
they
even be a
love
case.
being asked. Experts love being asked.
Absolutely.
Reach out to a human, 100%. You won't be sad.
And I think when you look at this particular question, you go, okay, asking AI about space physics and space travel and that kind of thing. The AI is giving you an unemotional response. It is giving you as neutral a response as possible. A source that is created by a human is not going to be unemotional. It is going to have bias in it. And you go, but surely that's bad. And you go, no, it's not bad. That bias, if you get two different pieces of information from two different human beings, that's amazing. That's now double the amount of options that you have available to you. If you get a physicist who goes, oh, well, space travel, all of the films have got it wrong. None of them have got it right. Okay, cool. How do you get it right? What is going to make it right? And so, yeah, that's the benefit of humans.
Yeah. Humans give you more. Even if
whether
you
you want it or not.
You're a little slower.
Yeah, very true.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for hanging out with us. Thanks to Guy for being here.
No, thank you for having me.
We will see you soon.